Hi, I'm Lance Humphreys. I'm the Executive Director of the Mount Vernon Place Conservancy. Welcome to Flower Mart. We'd like to thank B.Willow for their upcoming discussion on the intersection of social media and the rare plant trade and how it affects our environment. Stay tuned. This one's going to be really interesting. Enjoy.
Hi, everyone. How are you? My name is Liz Vayda. I'm so excited to be here, and I'm also so grateful to Flower Mart for having me today. So we've got a lot to cover, so I want to hop right into it. So as just stated, the title of this talk today is Social Media, Rare Plants, and Their Environmental Impact. So this first image is kind of meant to be a little bit of a shock value. So as you can see, this plant is listed on Etsy for $13,559. So I put this picture here to start just to kind of generate some thoughts on your end. This is a lot of money, you know, so what type of individual might be going online and able to afford this type of plant or looking for plants of this kind of caliber? You know, this sort of amount is the same amount as someone might use as a down payment on their house. So what is going on here? A little bit about me and B.Willow. So if you're not familiar, B.Willow is my company. We're a retail store in Remington. We primarily sell indoor houseplants, local goods, and wrap bouquets. I started my business in 2014 and we opened our shop in 2017. So just very briefly, my background for anyone who's curious, I did my undergrad in psychology at Earlham College. And then I followed that with a master's of environmental science at Johns Hopkins here in Baltimore. And one of my kind of most pivotal experiences in my young adulthood was a trip to New Zealand in 2008. This was my study abroad program in college. And this changed my life, really kind of set my career trajectory in motion and kind of helped me formulate my business. So if you have any questions about that, feel free to reach out to me later. I love to talk about New Zealand. So my mission, in short, is to create daily ways of interacting with the natural world. So bringing nature indoors. We spend a ton of time inside. So the ramifications of this are vast in terms of our mental and physical health. And lastly, I just wanted to touch on conservation. So you might be wondering kind of what the impetus was for me to put this talk together and want to talk about this specifically. So it's very much connected to our newfound partnership with the IUCN, which is the International Union for the Conservation of Nature. And with the IUCN, we are working together to do various types of fundraising and awareness building as it relates to conservation. So moving on, this is an overview of kind of everything we will be talking about. You may recognize the plant on the right, the Venus flytrap. So that will be coming into the conversation later. So we will get into a little bit more detail about the IUCN. If you're not familiar with who they are, what they do. We'll touch on the houseplant craze, how this has been driven by the pandemic. Moving beyond plant blindness, is this something you've heard about before? If not, we'll define what that is. We'll define the issue of illegal plants and poaching. Have you heard of the fact that there is an illegal plant trade? If not, we'll talk about that. CITES is a big part of this, the Endangered Species Act and the Red List. So we'll go over all of those. So what is being illegally traded? Currently, it's primarily cacti and succulents, carnivorous plants, aroids, tropicals, orchids, things of that sort, to name a few. We will kind of throughout the conversation talk about their environmental impact. And how to be an environmentally conscious plant buyer. So how to kind of take all of this information and let it positively inform you as a buyer of houseplants. So for that, we will go over what it means to be a cultivated versus a poached plant. Very important distinction. We'll also kind of discuss how there is such a gray area in terms of buying plants online. And we will also end on a positive note, you know, so with all of this kind of doom and gloom, there are some really positive things to take away from it. primarily how to use society's love of plants to fuel their conservation and protection worldwide. So this is kind of how my mission for bringing more plants indoors and kind of regaining those connections with the natural world has kind of transformed and evolved as I have been running my plant store. I am very passionate about conservation, and it's kind of one of those things where I can't sell plants and not take into account how I might be adversely affecting the environment. So it's super important to me, and that's why we're talking about it. All right, so IUCN, International Union for the Conservation of Nature. So this is an international organization. They work in the field of nature conservation and sustainable use of resources. So they are one of the premier organizations globally that is really involved in all of the data collection, analysis, research, field projects, advocacy work, education. So they are doing a lot of work all over the world to try to really promote conservation. So specifically, I am aligned with the Cacti and Succulent Plant Specialist Group, the CSSG. We will have a presentation from Barbara Getch, Dr. Barbara Getch, who is one of the premier researchers who has published findings on this whole subject. She'll be speaking, I think it's May 30th, but correct, I might be wrong, but it's towards the end of May. We'll be having her join us for a virtual lecture. So I wanted to also just touch on a friend of mine, Dr. Jared Margulies. So he went to Goucher College, and I'm from Baltimore, so we just have mutual friends. And early on, we were talking about just the illegal cac trade and how that was kind of influencing his work, which was previously more so focused on animals and the exploitation of tigers. So this kind of friendship has really morphed into this wonderful professional relationship where he has introduced me to the Cacti and Succulent specialist group, and this has created this formal partnership. So if you're interested in this topic, if you Google Dr. Margulis's, oh no, sorry. That's the joy of technology here. Hold on, everyone. My presentation disappeared. Sorry about that. Give me one sec. It was really strange how that just took my whole presentation away. It's okay. Here we go. Getting it back. Hope everyone's having a great day. It's beautiful outside. No longer as crazy windy. Oh, sorry, y'all. When you have everything set up and you get thrown off, you can't remember where you save things. Okay. Here we go. All right. We're back. Sorry, internet slow right now. I don't really know why that is. Okay. Here we go. Bear with me. Thank you for your patience here. All right, so moving on. So hopefully now you are familiar with this organization. Maybe you have not heard of them before, but they are amazing and are doing some really awesome work. Okay, here we go. Cool, all right. And we're back. All right, so the houseplant craze. If you have been paying attention to plants on social media, in marketing, you will know that plants are literally everywhere. So pre-pandemic, houseplants definitely had been rising in popularity. You really kind of saw this from the West Coast to the East Coast. And there's also just the growth of boutique plant shops like my shop. I would consider that a boutique plant shop, not so much a large-scale nursery with outdoor perennials, but highly focused on indoor houseplants. So like I said, this has been fueled in large part by marketing. You'll see plants in advertisements on TV, in products everywhere. They're all over. So this is definitely something that's just a reflection of our indoor lifestyle versus biophilia. So biophilia is the love of life or living things. So I think we've just gotten to a point as a society where we are really craving this interaction with other species and the outdoors because of how indoor our lifestyle has become. So I think the presence of plants in all facets of life is really just a natural evolution of how we've just been craving this, and here now it's just kind of slowly become incorporated into lots of different parts of life. So pandemic hits, we're stuck at home. A lot of people start buying plants if they hadn't already started a collection. This was really a good motivation to get that going, and a lot of this for people was due to the kind of therapeutic effects of plants. So creating a more serene working environment, just making it a little more pleasant to be at home. And another thing that I hypothesize is just that people are also experiencing more opportunities to observe their plants. So when you're home every day, when you're able to kind of just walk by your houseplants and notice them every day versus, maybe in the morning or maybe in the evening or maybe on the weekend, but, we're all busy all the time. So when you're able to observe your plants every single day, you have more of an opportunity to notice more minute changes or subtleties. So for that reason, you can be more successful because you'll notice, oh, wow, that plant is not as kind of upright as it used to be. It's a sign of dryness, it's wilting. So you might water that plant a little more sooner than you would have if you weren't working from home and able to catch that sooner. And just for reference, I have a lot of screenshots from Instagram that you'll notice throughout the presentation. So we've got about 6.4 million posts on Instagram that have tagged houseplants. So it is a craze. Plant blindness. Is this becoming less relevant? So what is plant blindness? Plant blindness is the inability to see or notice the plants in one's own environment. And this was coined by two botanists. So this common condition results in a chronic inability to recognize the importance of plants in the biosphere and in human affairs. So when most people think of endangered species, they think of animals, when in reality there are lots and lots and lots of endangered plants as well as animals, but we tend to gravitate towards mammals, animals, things like that. So this photo is just a good example of that. What do you notice? What do you see in this photo? Most people would say a chicken, not the plants behind it or within it. All right, so the illegal plant trade, what is going on? As you can see in this photo, there are two men who were actually arrested for harvesting lots and lots of one particular species of succulent that we will get into a little bit later. So quite simply, it's the harvesting or poaching of plants from the wild with the intention of selling them. And primarily using online marketplaces, so eBay, Etsy, Amazon, and the element with all of these marketplaces is that anyone can be a seller. This is an open place on the internet where anyone, doesn't matter who you are, what your experience is, you can go on and you can sell plants whenever you want. So it opens the door to a lot of potential issues. So I want to just define what CITES is, because this is a very important kind of treaty that has a lot of influence on conservation at large. So it's a multilateral treaty with the intention of protecting endangered animals and plants, which was drafted in 1963. So a couple things I'll reference in this talk are Appendix I and Appendix II. So any species listed under Appendix I are identified as being threatened with extinction. So they require the greatest protection. And these types of plants are restricted from being commercially traded. So if you see one for sale, it is illegal. It is not supposed to be for sale. Versus Appendix II. So these are plants, species that have the potential to be threatened without proper trade control. So just for reference, all cacti are considered Appendix II plants. So you have to have permits to trade those plants. And there's about 900 or so Appendix I cacti. So the main thing to kind of take away about CITES is that this is really all about international trade. So this doesn't oversee any domestic trade. It's really just, a plant being shipped out of, let's say, Indonesia into America. If that happens, that plant must be accompanied with a phytosanitary certificate. And kind of the sad part about this is that even though this exists as a way to kind of deter and oversee and regulate and manage all of this, it doesn't stop people from doing it, from shipping, from harvesting first illegally and then shipping these plants worldwide. So who accepts the risk? And lots of times this is the buyer, not the seller. So within the US, just for context, we also have the Endangered Species Act, which I'm sure you have heard of. The purpose of that is the protection and recovery of endangered plants and animals, and it also works to help enforce CITES. So I underlined animals just to kind of reiterate this point that so much emphasis is placed on the protection of animals. Not saying I don't think we should, obviously we should, but we should have an equal amount of prioritization for our plants as well, because if we don't have plants, we don't have anything to eat. So it's also just as important to protect our plants. So something I'll mention throughout this presentation too is symptomatic versus preventative approaches. So these are symptomatic approaches. So instead of kind of going out and being like, here are X amount of plants that are endemic to this one particular region, they're not threatened, but we need to just take care of them for the potential that they might become threatened later. It's more it is that way versus preventative, meaning we are making sure we're kind of chronicling those species before they become threatened. So it's really just evaluating plants when they've already reached that point. So how can we kind of change it so that we are more so advocating for plants before they become threatened? So it's also to do with the protection of their habitat, as well as kind of how these shipped plants are enforced, how shipped plants are enforced so that they are not illegal plants. So through warrants, through inspections, but even with those happening, how many shipments of plants go unnoticed? What does it take to get on their radar to make sure that plants are inspected? And I don't really know the answer to this, and I will not claim to be a full-on expert in this topic, but I'm hoping to kind of use this to personally delve into this topic a little deeper and really learn personally what is really going on here. But just through my own experience, it is super easy to take a plant and pop it in the mail. I don't do that really. We don't ship plants, but I know that we very easily can. So next is the IUCN Red List of Threatened Species. So you may have heard of the Red List. So this is a very important kind of body of species that have been chronicled online through the IUCN in order to take inventory and give each species a status of their conservation for the purpose of monitoring them. The Red List has a very strong scientific base. It's recognized as the most authoritative guide to the status of biological diversity. But as we'll see in some future slides, this organization, the IUCN, desperately does need more funding. We need more people who are aware of what they're doing, because if you imagine trying to document every single species on the face of the earth and also evaluate it for what its conservation status is, that is a ton of work. So there is a lot of work to be done, not only to get more species on the list, but also to update their status, because some of these species haven't been reevaluated for decades. All right. So the Cactaceae family. A lot of people are very surprised to know that out of 1,400 species of cacti, 31% are endangered. And these are cacti are within the top 5 threatened plant and animal groups in the world. So they are very at risk. And the dominant drivers of this is actually the horticultural trade and collectors, which is ironic because you would think people who are very into plants wouldn't want to also destroy them in their native environments. But sadly, that is kind of what's happening. Another fun fact about cacti, they are only native to the Americas. So if you have cacti being sold out of the Americas, that could be a warning sign that it might not be ethically sourced. So why are they so threatened? Well, cacti are very, very, very slow growing. They have evolved in very specialized environments, so deserts, very arid regions. So they are very unique in their physical makeup in order to survive in these very extreme environments. So they store a ton of water in their stems, as you know, and are covered with spines for protection. And another reason why they are threatened is also just habitat loss. So just doing a Instagram tag research on cacti, you can see 3.6 million posts tagged with cacti, 17 million tagged with cactus. And the reason I have these in here is just to kind of drive home the point of how obsessed we are. And social media really does showcase kind of with good numbers here to kind of let us know where society is with how obsessed we are and how embedded this has become into our cultures all around the world. So I'll just play this. This is just a little screenshot of Pinterest, just searching cactus. If you type that in, you'll just be scrolling and scrolling and scrolling and scrolling and scrolling. All right, so microchipping saguaro cacti. So one of the most kind of iconic photos or just visuals of a cactus that most people bring to mind when they think of cacti is the saguaro cactus. So what you're seeing this park ranger doing here is actually microchipping a saguaro cacti with the purpose of preventing its poaching from the wild. So they're valued at around $100 per foot. So there's a huge incentive for people to go out and harvest them illegally. So pretty wild to think that we are going to measures of embedding microchips into saguaro cacti so we can track them if they're being stolen. So as we mentioned in the beginning of the talk, we'll be talking about environmental impacts. So if all saguaro cacti were to be stripped from the landscape, the wild landscape, what would happen? A lot of ecological destruction. So they are a keystone species in the Sonoran Desert. So there's more than 100 animals that do depend on the saguaro cacti. For example, pack rats, rabbits, deer, all of these creatures do eat the flesh of the cacti in order to access water in these arid regions. Other things like birds will nest in them. They'll also perch upon the top of the cacti in order to hunt. And you can kind of see a trickle-down effect of how when woodpeckers and gilded flickers build nests and raise their young in a safe place above any sort of predators on land, other smaller birds move in when they move out. So there's just a lot going on ecologically that makes these species so important to this ecosystem. And if they were to disappear, all of these species have the potential of also going extinct and letting certain species become much more dominant without predators to keep them in check. All right, so this list down here, these are all Appendix I classified cacti. So if you remember, Appendix I means these are threatened with extinction and they are protected under CITES and with the Appendix I, so they are illegal in terms of being sold. If you see one of these being sold, it should not be. So as you can see on social media, that doesn't stop the public from being obsessed with these plants. And you have to wonder, where are these plants coming from? And the reason is, or the reason being, at some point along the way, these plants were taken from the environment. These are not wildly cultivated plants, to my knowledge. So it is definitely a warning sign to see all of these photos being tagged. So here you can see an example on eBay of one of these Appendix I cacti for $40 for a tiny plant. This is about a 2-inch pot. So you're going to imagine the size of this plant for $40. That's a very small plant. You're also going to notice the location of where it's sold, which is Ukraine. So as we stated before, cacti are native to the Americas, not Ukraine. So that is a warning sign right there. Where is this plant coming from? The fact that it is very, very teeny tiny and has a high price, that means it is desirable. That means it is not cultivated widely, and therefore its value goes up. So some warning signs: if you are looking online for cacti, you want to make sure they are not listed under CITES or threatened. And this text just goes along with that. So this plant does not come with phytosanitary documents because the seller cannot get them, because it's this Appendix I plant. They do not have documents to export the plant because they are not allowed to. So if you have risk with this product, don't buy. But basically, they're saying if you buy this, it's, you're taking the risk, not us. So definitely another warning sign there. Just another example here of another plant. Again, teeny tiny, probably a 2 to 4 inch size pot, $65 plant, being shipped from Thailand, where it is not native to. All warning signs. And again, they're not providing the phytosanitary certificate. All right, so that early on slide I showed you, what was happening was 3,700 Dudleya farinosa succulents, which are native to the coastline of California up into Oregon, were seized with a value of $600,000. So these were men from South Korea who were wild harvesting these succulents and shipping them bare root to South Korea. So pretty crazy. These guys were sentenced to 10 years in jail after they admitted to the poaching. So this example kind of set off a lot more awareness within the academic community that there was an issue here going on. And this is a very interesting case study, and we'll keep talking about it. So social media, we've got about 12,000 Dudleya posts here, and succulents are 11.7 million tagged posts of succulents. So people are definitely obsessed with succulents. So more about Dudleya. So what happened prior to these plants being seized was there was already a flood of Dudleya farinosa to the market, primarily in South Korea. And some of these plants were selling for upwards of thousands of dollars. Reason being, they were able to harvest large specimens, and that is what people wanted. They were seeing these plants on marketplaces for exorbitant amounts of money. So why did this happen? Like we said, succulents are just more and more popular. And also people are interested in making money off of this fad. So yeah, it's a very crazy kind of example of how this particular plant is actually not threatened. It is, its populations are stable. However, you're kind of seeing how this intersection of social media popularizing a certain species can lead to its demise potentially. So the fact that this was caught early is really, really good. So now there are tons of cultivated Dudleya, so it's less of an issue, but it really didn't stop people from wild harvesting and shipping them to South Korea. So yeah. These types of plants, if they were to have gone extinct, their function within the ecosystems are to stabilize soil on these steep slopes, and also they're a source of nourishment for hummingbirds, butterflies, moths. So just, when you remove species, you really do affect the well-being of many, many other species. So just for additional kind of context here, you can see how these plants are very expensive and are still kind of all over the place on our online marketplaces. So, like I was saying, they're not threatened. They're mostly cultivated now, but it highlights these important points. So fads driven by social media can very quickly evolve into a bigger issue. And it is just even more disastrous when we're talking about slow growing plants. So my question is, what if no one had noticed that these guys were going out and harvesting these plants? Well, they could potentially have gone extinct by now. And it was just, it was an interesting story in that someone noticed at the post office these guys with boxes and boxes of these plants, and someone actually reported them. So it was not even, you know, a federal entity that stepped in first. It was just an ordinary citizen that noticed something kind of off at the post office. So pretty wild. All right, we're going to move on to something closer to home, the Venus flytrap. So the Venus flytrap is actually native to a very small part of North America, 70-mile radius in South Carolina and primarily North Carolina. So there are only 35,000 left in the wild. And at one point in time, there were 125 populations in North Carolina and South Carolina, but that has now dropped to 71. And 69 are in North Carolina, and only 20 of these are considered to be excellent or really good viability. So as you can see with this news headline here, people are highly incentivized to go out and illegally harvest these plants. So thankfully now it is considered a felony if you are caught digging these up, but it is definitely an area of serious concern. So as you can see, the Venus flytrap is listed on the red list. So that's awesome. Marked as, well, not awesome that it's listed, but good that it's being monitored. But as you can see, the last time it was assessed was the year 2000. So, you know, who knows actually what its status is. We have estimates, but the lack of funding that goes into the IUCN's work is really telling here. And this headline from early April, an expert in South Carolina thinks that they could soon become extinct. So no good. All right, moving on to Southeast Asia, primarily Indonesia and the Philippines. All right, so what you'll see here is a new species of Hoya solowiciana, and this new species was documented in 2020, so obviously very recently. Beautiful Hoya species. Oh, didn't mean to do that. Sorry about that. All right, so as I was saying, these two new species were just recently documented in 2020. Well, here we go. Same species listed on Etsy for $7,200. And as you'll see, as I scroll down here, it is being shipped from where it is native to Indonesia. So right here, we've got a pretty worrying example of a very expensive plant that is not widely cultivated, that was just recently classified, and here it is being sold for $7,200 on Etsy. So what's going on here? So Southeast Asia has been experiencing a marked rise in poaching and collection of illegal plants. So as you can see down here, the Republic of the Philippines Department of Environment, Natural Resources has come out with this announcement, that the public is being urged to report these poachers. So thankfully it has been recognized that this is happening, and the local government is trying to do something about it. And people are literally going out into the forests and extracting plants and selling them, because the pandemic has obviously affected a lot of people's livelihoods, and this has been seen as a way to make an income. As you can see on the right, some examples of wild harvested tropical plants. So What's good is that the government has stepped up the monitoring of social media and patrolling of natural areas amid reports of traders scouring the mountains and forests for plants. Some of these plants that they're noticing that are already threatened and are being taken are carnivorous pitcher plants, nepenthes, various different types of plants for bonsai, as well as a couple different alocasias. And all of these are just very, very popular plants. So Sanders alocasia, just mentioned on the previous slide, is on the red list as critically endangered, but you are seeing these being sold, so it's very worrying. And again, last assessed in 2008, so definitely very curious to know what the current numbers are. All right, so these two pictures I just put in here just again kind of for shock value, but also to just generate some thought as to what is the point of this? Why are people spending such exorbitant amounts of money? And it just, you know, it's leading to things like burglaring botanic gardens. You know, it's just, we obviously really need to do some, I think, soul searching globally to really understand the impact of what this craze is doing to our natural world. So how to be an ethical plant buyer, cultivated versus poached plants. Number one, and this is primarily if you're buying on, well, not primarily if you're buying online, whenever you're buying plants, know that you always have the right to ask the seller, you know, how are these plants grown? Are these cultivated plants? That's your keyword. Are these cultivated? For succulents and cacti, some warning signs: age. If you see something listed as very, very old or on its own root, that's a sign that it might be a wild harvested plant, because cacti and succulents grow very slowly. So if it's being sold already old, it's a sign it could have been wild harvested. Price, if the price is high, that's an indication that the plant is not yet widely cultivated. Therefore, it's more desirable and has that higher price point. So that, again, is just another risky warning sign there. If something is marked as hard grown, this is also interesting because some collectors do want plants that are from the wild. They prefer plants that are from the wild. They have a better, you know, appeal to them. But on the other hand, certain growers grow their plants to be hard grown. So they stress the plants in order to make them seem as though the plant has lived a little and has been grown in its native environment. So as you can see, it's just, this is a very murky kind of world here. The location. So for example, the Ukraine. Cacti are not native to the Ukraine. So that could be a potential warning sign as well. In addition to if the seller does not have phytosanitary documents. So basically, any plant sold internationally must have documents to go along with it. So if they don't have them, there might be a reason for that. Carnivorous plants. So warning signs that it might be nursery or poached versus nursery grown. One big thing here is uniformity. So as you can see, the plants on the left are all about the same size. And these are actually grown via tissue culture. So that's a very common way that a lot of nursery plants, tons of, you know, the plants we stock here are grown via tissue culture. And they have a similar growing medium versus on the right, these are questionable because the soil makeup is not uniform, and also the size of the plants are not uniform. So that's just another kind of cue of, could this be poached? So you're really just tasked with observing physically the plants and also researching from the sellers and asking them those hard questions of, you know, where'd you get your plants? I want to support sustainable methods of growing, you know, house plants. Where did your plants come from? And they, you know, they should be able to tell you that. So other tropicals, orchids, aroids, Hoyas, ferns. Again, your main question here is, are they cultivated via tissue culture? Were they propagated, grown from seeds? The growth should be pretty uniform. Seeds is a kind of a doozy because, you know, the question is, well, where, and for propagated plants, where did the original plant come from? So it's just, yeah, it's complicated. Another element here are hybrid plants. So these are man-made hybrids, crosses between two species. Very, very common in the horticulture industry. We have tons of hybrids that we commonly sell. So those are all cultivated. You will never find those growing in the wild unless they're just introduced. So it's much harder to identify tropicals that have been poached, because compared to desert plants, they grow pretty fast. And yeah, it's very hard to really ID a poached tropical versus a poached cactus. But as you can see here, $12,500 for 6 of these plants. I think these are just overpriced, but the question to me is, well, where did the original plant come from? So like I've said, this is just very gray. We need to, like the red list is doing, assess all sorts of different types of plants to really get a good sense of what their population is. And again, symptomatic versus preventative. We need to be more preventative. We need to know kind of what the numbers of species are out in the wild, so that we can return back, reevaluate, and see if there has been a decline or an incline. Just a quote from the Department of Natural Resources in the Philippines. We want to remind everyone that collection and trade of threatened species are prohibited unless such acts are covered by a permit. Please help us protect our wildlife. So the key word here is threatened species. So again, it's just the emphasis on protecting plants that are already threatened versus all plants at large. And the slide that I started the presentation with, just to kind of recap back with this. So this type of plant is not widely cultivated. This is not a type of philodendron we can get from our growers that are doing it through cultivation and tissue culture. So that's kind of a question. It's not widely cultivated, and it's for sale out of Texas. So where did this plant originally come from? It's not native to Texas. It's native to the Brazil region. So where did the original plant come from? It's just, who knows? And also the price. Obviously, this is showing that this is a highly desirable plant that is not widely cultivated. So that is a warning. So kind of moving towards the positive sides of all this. So we have opportunities to support our international nurseries. So what I'm super excited about with the IUCN is how we can hopefully work together to create some frameworks so that the industry can kind of work in a better way to support these ethical nurseries internationally, where a lot of these highly desired plants are native to. So how can we develop better standards so that ethical growers can demonstrate that? Thinking about the food industry, we have organic as a standard. And I know, it's organic can be exclusive in that it's expensive to get certified organic, and you can be a farm that is technically, growing your food organically, but you just can't afford to get that stamp on your produce. So obviously there's layers to all of this, but we do need something similar for plants. For me as a buyer of plants, it would be so much more helpful if the people I was purchasing plants from had some sort of demarcation, on the plants, on their website, when we get set up with them as a buyer, so that we know that their plants are ethically sourced. But currently there is no such thing. And also just working directly with these growers to create partnerships for international sale has huge benefits to the local economy in these regions where these plants are more native to. And this could be wonderful in terms of just helping them create more jobs. And like I was saying, just providing assurance that the plants are ethically sourced. So this quote I just really love. It's from University of Wisconsin botanist Don Waller, and it's our job to figure out how not to kill the things we love and to use our appreciation to protect them instead. So this just really sums up kind of where I am with plants and conservation. And on the right, I have an example of a sticker that we put on our plants that are listed as endangered on the red list. And for every purchase of them, we donate 15% of the plant sale to IUCN CSSG. So that's kind of one of our ways that we've come up with to help translate, the purchase of plants into support for their conservation. And lastly, I just want to talk about a success story for that incorporated B.Willow. So with the IUCN, we featured them in March, and we collected money on their behalf and fundraised for them, and we were able to raise about $950. So there was a huge seizure of Copiapoa cacti, which are native to Chile. And they were seized in Italy with the intention of being sold illegally. And there's about 1,300 of them that were seized. And as you can see, their value is 1 million euro. So this was a ton of plants with a huge value associated with them. But the money that we raised went towards returning these plants back to Chile. So this is just a screenshot of the article from the IUCN, but they were repatriated back to Chile on not long ago, April 19th. And the money we raised was able to fund about a third of those plants being sent back. So it just really does go to show how, kind of Bernie Sanders style, if we pool small amounts of money together, we can really affect a lot of change. So yeah, that concludes my presentation. Thank you for bearing with me during those technical issues. And hopefully we have some questions. All right, so question from Lance, who advocates for updates to these assessments? As you've mentioned, some of the data is rather old. So basically every 5 or 10 years, there are different entities that meet within the IUCN, and when they meet, they go through and people can submit plants that they want to be reevaluated. So it's basically a voting process. So yeah, hopefully, sorry, I didn't word that very well, but it does happen every 5 or 10 years. And different countries, can come and say, hey, I think such and such should be added and should be, upgraded or downgraded in terms of its status. All right, question, how do I know I'm not buying illegal plants? How do I know if I can trust my local garden store is ethically sourcing their plants? So that's a really good question. If you are buying from a nursery somewhere like my shop or somewhere like Greenfields, you can feel pretty confident that they are ethically sourced because, like I was saying, most of the plants we stock, well, all of the plants we stock are cultivated. So these are plants that have been cultivated for several decades, and the risk of them actually, being taken from the wild and being resold to us is, it just isn't really the case. So thankfully, we have good growers, and it's all done in their greenhouses. So, the big question is, well, where back in the day did those plants originate from, and how did they become cultivated to begin with? But yeah, they're all cultivated primarily through tissue culture and propagating. But you should still ask. And if anyone is curious, we are happy to answer those questions. Most plants are grown out of Florida, where it's obviously more temperate year round to accommodate that growth. So yeah, just always feel free to ask. But you're really, really, really concerned more so with your online sellers, your eBay, your Etsy, those types of things. What does the future of horticultural trade look like? It's an interesting question. I think, for me, I just hope that we develop more transparency. And I think it's just inevitable, just like with the food industry where, people weren't necessarily worried about the ecological impact of the meat or the quality of the fruits and vegetables they were buying a few decades ago. But now here we are, and it's such a topic that most people are highly aware of. They get, ooh, pesticides. Yeah, I don't want to buy that because that could be bad. Or, oh, genetic modification. I think people do understand the not only health, but ecological impacts of how food is produced. So I would just love more than anything for that to kind of also apply to the horticulture industry, because it desperately does need it, especially with all of these illegal seizures, poaching that it has been documented as happening around the world. Are cultivated plants hardier or more fragile than wild plants? Typically they are hardier. So these are plants that have been grown without like natural stressors. So that can just, more so lead to them having more, how do I put it? Yes, the answer is they are definitely hardier than wild plants because they are growing in controlled environments. And I think that was the last question. So thank you all so much. Sorry I talked a little fast. Just wanted to be able to get through all of that. Please reach out to me. My email is liz@bwillow.com if you have any questions or want to be involved. Yeah, I'm very interested in this topic, and this is not the last you'll hear about it from me. So thank you so much for watching.